market has new buzzwords like quiet quitting and quiet firing.
Skilled jobs of the future are not what they used to be. The salad days are over.
Do you feel like the state represents you? When you vote, is it because you believe in your candidate, or is it because they're at least better than the other guy? Do you think voting will actually change anything? Or do you feel like you're just spinning your wheels? Or, preventing mass atrocities as a result of your vote? Are these just feelings, or is this the reality? And if this is the reality, how did we get here? Today is about the failure of capitalist democracies. Class is in session. Last time, we went over why capitalists need to prioritize profits and why that necessarily puts them in conflict with workers. We discussed why it's in workers' interest to recognize the relationship they have with their employer, band together, and fight for the life that they want. Today, I wanted to ask you the question: can workers band together and make their interests represented by the state, by the government? Can we beat the capitalists with state intervention? Can capitalist democracies save us? That's what today's about. What capitalist democracies promise is that despite the income inequality that capitalism causes, the levers of democracy will enable individuals to still have a say in what the state does. This is the promise of democracy, the promise of every elected individual, that if you vote for them and they win, they will represent your interests. So why doesn't it feel like that? It's hardly even necessary for me to suggest that our democracy is broken. We all feel it. While many still believe in the promise of the American dream, fewer people than ever believe in the promise of democracy. Pew Research reports that trust in the government went from 77% in 1964 to 20% in 2022. That is a significant dive. At the same time, only 17% of participants said the American dream was out of reach for them in 2019, even though economic mobility is at its lowest in 40 years. So, yeah, our democracy is broken. We all know this, but why? Is it because our politicians are greedy crooks? Or is there a systemic reason? Is it bad apples, or is it the necessary state bias towards capital? You guessed it, it's the capitalist system we live under and how it incentivizes and disincentivizes certain kinds of behavior that has turned our elected officials against us, destroying our democracy. There are three reasons why capitalism, the economic system we live under, biases the state towards the wealthy. 1, the wealthy are more likely to get into office. 2, the wealthy exercise influence on the people in office. And 3 is the most important one, and we'll save that for the end because it's a bombshell. It'll be fun. First, let's look at whether the wealthy are more likely to get into office. The makeup of the current administration should answer that question for us. Members of Congress provide personal financial statements that are available to the public, so we have some insight here. It turns out Congress is almost exclusively made up of fat cats. The median net worth of members of Congress who filed disclosures last year is just over $1 million. Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, I think it's Florida, is the richest of them all, with an estimated net worth of nearly $260 million. And don't forget Representative Greg Gianforte, a Republican from Montana, who made his wealth through a software company and has $189 million in net assets.
Who's your source? I can't reveal my sources. But it's Greg.
Government work is lucrative too. for no one except for those in power. The leaders of both chambers make the top 10 list. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, has seen her wealth increase to nearly $150 million from $41 million in 2004, the first year open source began tracking personal finances. Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, saw his net worth increase from $3 million to over $34 million during that same time. There's a lot of money. Everybody's got it, except for, everybody else. So it just so happens that all of our most powerful elected officials are insanely wealthy. Do their riches influence them? Of course they do. Being capitalists themselves makes them far more sympathetic to the wants of the wealthy and far less with the plights of the poor. Wealth is an incredibly effective predictor of attitudes towards economic policy. While social issues such as trans rights and gun control are predictive by party affiliation, economic policies such as higher taxation or free healthcare are predictive by income and wealth accumulation. That's why the parties might differ on social issues, which are incredibly important issues, by the way, but they're basically identical on economic policy lines. Even if we had all workers as representatives, the second point on this list would stand. The wealthy have far more influence on those who are elected into office than workers. Even if all of the elected individuals were workers, it wouldn't matter. The first bit of evidence for this fact is outcome-based. Often, workers will have their interests represented in legislation, but only where their interests are aligned with capitalists. Where workers' interests are not aligned with capitalists, it is the capitalists' wants that are prioritized. Always. Whether it be new pipelines, new coal plants, tax exemptions, workers' rights, it doesn't matter whether it's Republican or Democrats, the wealthy will have their interests represented and the workers will not, if their interests are not aligned. How do capitalists achieve this? Many ways. Lobbying is the first obvious one. Lobbyists are agents of their employers, working in Washington to write legislation, inform elected representatives of what their employers' interests are, and generally manipulate the government to achieve the outcome their wealthy patrons are interested in. Lobbying elected representatives in Washington is one of the most effective methods of pushing the state to represent your interests. Lobbyists almost exclusively represent private businesses in Congress and will therefore lobby for the sake of maximizing shareholder value and profits, which, as we know, means enabling companies to be as hostile to their workers as possible. So, while farmers, software executives, and grocery store owners all might have discrete, separate interests and hire distinct lobbyists, all those lobbyists will work towards the same end: deregulation, diminishing worker rights, and fewer taxes on the wealthy. This has an immense impact on elected officials' policy proposals. The second reason why money dictates public policy is because potential candidates won't actually become lawmakers without the support of capital. Campaigns cost money. The more influential the position, the more money it will cost. $8.7 billion was spent on the 2020 congressional races, and $5.7 billion was spent on the presidential campaigns. That's a collective $14.4 billion spent on elections in 1 year. But you say, what gets candidates votes is the quality of their ideas, not the money they accrue. The marketplace of ideas, that's what it's all about. But this is untrue. Candidates who earn more money win races, almost invariably. Wealthy people wouldn't donate otherwise. Money means access. Money is what pays for people to canvass for you. It's what pays for advertising campaigns and speech crafters, copywriters, and marketing managers. It pays for all of it. A candidate can have the best ideas ever. They can be the most charismatic and experienced person to exist. And you won't even see them if they don't have the money. They won't get in front of you. You won't know they exist. And what that means is, if you want to win, you need money. If you want money, you need to appeal to the people who have it. Therefore, before anything else, a candidate must appeal to capitalists because they have all the money. It's only once you have the money that you're able to reach your electorate with your policy positions. And by that time, your wealthy donors have made certain policy positions off limits. The third, final, and most important systemic reason why the state is biased towards capital, drumroll please, is the state's budget is contingent on the taxation that is accrued as a result of the capitalists' business endeavors. Fucking bombshell, I know. The most important reason is, it's not the most boring, but it's like the most structural, whatever. The state needs a budget to run, and that budget exists because of taxes. Under capitalism, the state needs capitalists to provide commodities for the market and to offer work to workers so that they can tax those activities. It's as a result of trading on the market that the state can take a sales tax. It's as a result of employees earning a salary that the state can take an income tax. It's as a result of people owning property that the state can take property taxes. Capitalism makes each of us a slave to the market. Market dependence. Once again, we are dependent on the marketplace, even the government. Capitalists privately own the means of production. And because the state is dependent on production, they're dependent on the capitalist. The government cannot exist without capitalists making jobs for workers under our current system. While we can do something about electing working representatives and limiting the influence of money on elections and how they influence the people who have been elected, under the capitalist system, the state will always have an unfair bias towards capital and those who hold it. For this very fact, we must balance the advantages of capitalism against this negative and necessary bias, and do everything we can to eliminate every other form of bias. It's not democracy if one group of people have more influence over those in office than another. That makes sense, right? It's not one person, one vote. It's $1, one bit of leverage. And the people who have all the dollars, they have all the leverage. It's as simple as that. Can we combat this bias through the state itself? Can we use the government to fix the government? Unfortunately, that doesn't seem possible. If the state is biased towards capital, it's almost impossible to use the state itself to undo its own biases, at least by voting alone. We can always vote for the best candidates, but once they're in office, they will prioritize capital just as their predecessors did. We must look elsewhere to have our policies prioritized. That being said, and I really have to emphasize this, it is important that you take every opportunity you have to vote. In no way do I endorse the idea that voting is the only way we can make our voices heard. And I do believe that the political parties in the United States of America have more in common than they do differences. But the fascist right wing in the United States are actively attempting to incite violence against minority groups. Yesterday, it was Mexicans. Today, it's transgender people. Tomorrow, it'll be someone new. Voting against these people is paramount to preventing the genocide of a people, something they suggest more and more these days. So please, choose to vote if you're able. The message of this video is that voting isn't sufficient. We need to do more to achieve more. But that doesn't mean in the meantime we stop voting. Please vote, and don't vote for fascists. That would be great. If you want to vote for fascists, don't vote. In that case, just skip it. It's useless. You're good. So, if we can't win in the state, where do we go? I'm genuinely asking. What do you think people do if we have as little power as I'm suggesting we do? Think about it. Talk about it in the comments. Disagree with me there too if you want. You know, I'm here for it. It's collaboration. You know, we'll talk about it. We'll figure this out. I'll be there too. Next week we're discussing what's next. Spoiler alert. We're going back to the workplace. See if we can wrangle up some power there. Until then, class dismissed. So, thanks for watching, guys. This episode is only possible because of books like Confronting Capitalism by Vivek Chibber, The Unheavenly Chorus by Schlossman, Verba, and Brady, Affluence and Influence by Martin Gillens, and The Origin of Capitalism by Ellen Meiksens Wood. Really hope I pronounced that right. Give them a look. Highly recommend. If you want any additional info, there's tons in those books. I mentioned this before, Confronting Capitalism by Vivek Chibber. Really, really accessible, and also just a great little kind of overview of how capitalism screws us. Big inspiration for this channel. This is part of a massive series I have planned, exploring capitalism, how it screws us, and what we can do about it. I've created a Patreon that you can check out. You can contribute more directly to this project there. That being said, if you can't, you couldn't do something for free. You could share the video, I don't know, with everybody in your contact list. That'd be pretty ballsy. I don't know. I think they'd really like it. I'd really like that. I don't know. Whatever you do, I appreciate you. Peace out. Bye.
We should talk more about our business system.
Point up the facts that it really works, and works well. Don't you think so too?